Welcome to today's episode of Literary Crossroads. I'm your host, Clara Martin, and today we're traversing the fascinating terrain of African literature through the reflections of renowned Nigerian writer John Pepper Clark. Our episode is titled Between Art and Commitment, John Pepper Clark on the African Writer's Role. We will explore Clark's thoughts on how language shapes the African writer's identity, responsibility, and commitment through his well-known plays such as Ozidi, The Raft, and Song of a Goat. So let's first set the stage by defining some critical terms. When we talk about negritude, we're referring to a cultural and literary movement that emerged in the 1930s, particularly among African intellectuals in France. It emphasizes Black culture, African values, and the importance of African identity in a colonial context. And what about negative capability? This term, coined by English poet John Keats, describes an artist's ability to engage with multiple perspectives and experiences, even those that are contrary to their own.
To kick off, let's delve into our first segment, language, audience, and Ozidi. In a thought-provoking interview, Clark tackled a complex question: why write in English, a language that is not inherently African? This is especially relevant in a country like Nigeria, home to over 500 ethnic groups and languages. English, as a lingua franca, becomes a bridge connecting all these cultures. So, Clara, how does that resonate with what we understand about language and culture?
It's fascinating, isn't it? By choosing to write in English, Clark doesn't just reach his local audience, but also expands his reach to global audiences, navigating multiple cultural contexts. In Ozidi, he creatively intertwines indigenous stories with the English language, creating a layered text that speaks to both insider and outsider audiences. His work, as he notes, communicates with those familiar with his heritage and with a wider world that may not understand those cultural depths.
Absolutely. And what's striking is his acknowledgement of the varied reception of his work. He reflects on how his play might be read differently by his parents, who aren't comfortable with English, versus his younger siblings, who are more proficient. It's like asking, what does it mean to write for diverse audiences? This question of audience always shapes an artist's intention.
Yes, and it brings us to our next segment, negritude, identity, and English-speaking Africa. Clark challenges some of the broader claims of negritude, especially the ideas that Africans possess innate emotional or intuitive qualities. What did he say about this idea?
Clark emphasized that such statements can be overly simplistic and sometimes counterproductive. He believes that qualities like science and intellectualism are learned, not inherent. This viewpoint encourages a more nuanced understanding of African identity and discourages the idea that any group can be pigeonholed into a single stereotype. It's a crucial reminder of the diversity of thought within African communities and writers alike.
Indeed, he also acknowledges the historical context in which negritude emerged, particularly for Africans in Paris confronting a dominant French culture. Clark cautions that while negritude served its purpose, it shouldn't become a stagnant ideology. It's vital for movements to evolve rather than freeze at a moment in time.
That leads perfectly into our third segment: who is an African writer, and what is his role? Clark grapples with defining an African writer. He raises questions about whether such a designation stands on subject matter, language, or themes. What insights did he share regarding identity and cultural representation?
Clark acknowledges the complexity in defining an African writer, pointing out that a white author writing about Africa, like Joseph Conrad in Heart of Darkness, complicates identity. Is it sufficient to label that as African literature? His reflections push us to think critically about the influences of colonialism and the ongoing evolution of literature in Africa.
He also touches on the idea that every writer's role isn't a singular heroic responsibility. In fact, he argues that writers, much like lawyers or teachers, are citizens serving their communities. Isn't that a refreshing perspective?
Absolutely. It challenges the notion that artists must always be activists first. Clark asserts the importance of valuing art for its own sake. If a playwright chooses to produce works that stir the social pot, that's one role. However, the primary task remains to create enduring art that resonates culturally. It's an important distinction.
Now, moving on to our next segment, war commitment and negative capability. When the discussion of war arose, Clark stated that while any citizen, writer included, could take up arms in crisis, he warns against championing the artist's role as inherently militant. This ties back to negative capability, where imagination allows writers to explore experiences beyond their own.
Exactly. Clark argues that the authenticity of a writer's voice doesn't hinge on their personal experiences in war. It's about their capacity to move audiences with words that resonate, beautiful, truthful, and powerful narratives. That's the commitment that matters most.
This brings us to our final segment, where we'll explore how Clark's Song of a Goat might connect to Greek tragedy. What did he identify as the influences on his work?
Clark admits the echoes of classical influences like Sophocles and even Garcia Lorca, but he emphasizes that these influences are intermixed with his Niger Delta background. Themes like sacrifice and family lineage in Song of a Goat illustrate universal ideas, but are deeply rooted in his own cultural narrative.
So interesting how Clark exemplifies the synthesis of various traditions to create something distinctly African while still capable of speaking across cultures. It reflects the blending of classical and indigenous experiences, ultimately enriching African literature.
As we wind down, let's recap the central tension guiding Clark's reflections. The role of the African writer stands at a crossroads. They navigate languages, histories, and expectations. But for Clark, the ultimate measure of their work isn't merely political. It's the enduring power of the art itself that transcends boundaries.
Right. Ultimately, John Pepper Clark reminds us of the rich complexity of African literature and the diverse responsibility writers carry. It's a balancing act between personal commitment and the broader implications of their work, framed through the lens of cultural heritage. Thank you for joining us today on this literary journey.
And thank you for listening. This is Clara Martin, signing off until next time on Literary Crossroads. Stay curious and keep exploring the literary world, where every story opens up new horizons.